Hi, everyone. Welcome. So excited to have you back for our final session of our virtual conference. We are so excited to have had you here with us, and I'm so excited for you to be joining us for this final session on grant making for institutional wealth and power building in communities of color. It's gonna be a great session. I'm so excited for you to be talking with Trella and Tanisha today. And so with that, I am going to hand it right over to both of you and enjoy the session, everyone.
Thank you so much, Nicole. As Nicole stated, we are actually really overjoyed to be here with you all today. My name is Trella Walker. I am currently the interim CEO at Nonprofit Finance Fund, which is a national CDFI. And for those of you who are blank-faced on the CDFI, it's basically a government subsidized bank. And we serve as an intermediary that focuses primarily on nonprofit organizations. 2 years ago, Nonprofit Finance Fund made a commitment to support organizations led by and serving communities of color. And so we came to GEO's conference today to talk about grant making for institutional wealth and power building in communities of color, specifically because we believe that you need to hear from those communities what they need, and in order to support them, they should speak for themselves. When we were in person last week, we had the pleasure of having two folks join us. We had Trabian Shorters, who is the CEO of Be Me Community and one of the world's leading social entrepreneurs around the national movement to first define Black people by their aspirations and contributions, and then to secure their fundamental freedom to live, own, vote, and excel. And then we also had the pleasure of having Tanisha Nash Laird join us. And Tanisha Nash Laird is the current CEO of Newark Symphony Hall. And she is a social change agent and community developer who centers equity in her work. And she is leading the charge to help transform Newark, New Jersey, by supporting its arts and culture community and best serving the community. So today, unfortunately, our dear friend Trabian Shorters could not join us. And so we're going to take an opportunity to kind of share with you the messaging that Trabian shared with us in person. And so you all have to be a little extra patient with me today because I am going to try to put on my Trabian hat and embody him and embrace what he shared with everyone on last week. And basically where we're starting is that if we want to support wealth and power building in communities of color, we really need to orient towards our aspirations and not the deficits of said community. And Trabian defined that as asset framing. And so for those of you who have had the pleasure of having training on asset framing, it is an absolutely incredible way to think about how we support communities of color in particular. For some reason, I can't advance. Can y'all see that? Oh, it's advancing now. So there we go. Asset framing is actually a narrative model that defines people by their assets and aspirations before noting the challenges and deficits. It invests in people for their continued benefit to society and not just because they have challenges or just because they are lacking in some way. When we start talking about institutional challenges, then when we organize and frame how people are seen by the institutional challenge that they are trying to overcome, we have a difficult time in seeing them for who they are and what they bring to the table. So I'm going to give you all a quick snapshot of Trabian talking about asset framing specifically. So just so that we could bring Trabian's voice into the room since he wasn't able to be present with us today. So you guys give me just a second. Can you guys see the screen?
No, we cannot see the screen, Trella.
Gotta try it again, sorry. Here we go. We're just going to play it. Here we go.
Okay.
Asset framing is about not defining people by their challenge, right? So once you recognize that I aspire to be a scientist or a leader, or maybe I just aspire to graduate high school, like I have a goal to be a student, right? Whatever that aspiration is, if you acknowledge that aspiration before you go into my various challenges, you're telling a truer story about me, right? I don't run around believing I'm an at-risk this or a low-income that or a high poverty, high crime. Like no one carries around those labels thinking that's how I'm going to face the world, right? What people think about is I want to maybe go to school. I want to maybe someday own a home. I want to maybe possibly get out of this neighborhood or come back to this neighborhood and build. Whatever that person's aspiration is, if you haven't bothered to acknowledge that aspiration before you engage them, then you've made them an object in the sentence. They are a thing to be dealt with, to be moved, to be manipulated. They are not a person. And once you start to engage people as obstacles, once you start engaging people as problems, then recognize that you've now become the problem, right?
So when we think about what is the best way to serve a community, and we're starting out with thinking of them as problems and not the human beings that are there to do better work and to provide for themselves and to be contributing members of society. We have an orientation as though we're always solving something. And so Travian then continued to share with us this wonderful conversation about fixers and builders. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we do that, we're going to take a few minutes to do an exercise. And I believe I have breakout access. So I'm going to send everyone to breakout rooms, and we're going to do breakout rooms with 3 people. And so we're going to have, and how many total do we have? 41? Yeah, we'll do breakout rooms with 4 people. And so we're going to send everybody to breakout rooms. And in the breakout room, I'm going to put this question here so everyone has it. I want you to just take 2 minutes to see everybody in your breakout room and just observe them and observe how wonderful they are and who they are as a people. So just take 2 minutes to say hello, say, how are you doing, and observe everything you can. So in that room, remember everything that you can about the 4 folks that are in the room with you. And then we'll come back. And we're only going to be there for 2 minutes. Can you guys, which screen can you see? You see the PowerPoint screen?
I can see the gallery view here.
Okay, can
And
you?
also, Trella, I'm just gonna move Monique. It looks like she's in a room by herself. I'm just gonna move her to room 9.
Please, thank you.
No problem.
I don't know how she ended up by herself. Okay.
I think because some people aren't all accepting the breaker room. It's so hard. But yeah, so feel free to share your screen to get to the PowerPoint and I can let you know.
Yeah, I think I got it. Can you see it now? Okay, it's the right screen. Okay, beautiful.
Thanks.
All right, I think that's two minutes. We're gonna close the screen and give them 60 seconds to come back.
Perfect.
Do we have everyone back?
I think there's still about 20 seconds left. I'm sure people will use all 2 minutes. But yeah, just 10 seconds left.
All right, I think we have everyone back. Did you guys enjoy those 4 minutes of saying hello to each other and observing all these things about the individuals that you saw? Okay, fantastic. All right, so now I would like for someone to volunteer to tell me every bad thing that you observed about the person in the room. Anybody? Anybody willing to do that? No? No one? That could be a lot of fun. You sure? Nobody wants to do that? Okay. All right, so would anybody want to tell me why they don't feel comfortable? What was the feeling that came up when I asked you to tell me anything that you observed bad about the people that you were sharing a room with? What were the emotions that came from you? You just pop off mute, say something. It's not that many of us. Jennifer, I see you.
It just doesn't feel right.
It doesn't feel right, right?
Incredulous.
That's how we think about grant making. Tell me all of the bad things about you, about your community, about the people that you serve, and then tell me what you want. And then tell me how you figure out you're going to solve it, right? It is a really unsettling orientation that we ask of the people that we want to support. So when we're trying to elevate the voices of the community, it is important that we hear directly from that community so that they can share with us what they aspire to be, what they see for themselves, the journeys that they want to take, and not to have to go back and reinforce, reiterate, emphasize, highlight the challenges that have been placed before them as obstacles that they have to overcome. And so just starting in that framework shifts the dynamic that we have when we engage as funders with these communities that we are really dedicated to making change in. So the next concept that was shared with us in person that you all get to hear from me is the ideas of really thinking about whether you are a fixer or a builder. And this is how you show up in a community. So fixers and builders, before I even get started into thinking about it, just understand that we need both. Fixers do one thing, builders do another thing, but they are all helpful. So what are fixers? Fixers are problem focused. They really want to make sure that nothing is missing, that we are able to stabilize and control the environment, make sure that everything, the trains keep running, everything is going as it should, right? And so their focuses are really on renewing things, rebuilding communities, restoring opportunities, or recovering loss. And we see fixers come in quite often when there are abnormal traumas or tragedies. We see them come in when there's identified blighted neighborhoods and there's highlights on problems in said neighborhoods. Then we have fixers who come in and say, we don't want that. We want to make that better. And here is the way that we want to support said community, said opportunity. And we really fund and orient around that type of funding. They tell stories of gaps, they identify problems, they highlight deficits, they orient towards threats, and unfortunately, they emphasize brokenness. And that is really their commitment, is to address those issues. And then we have builders, and builders are who we don't talk about nearly as much. Builders are aspiration focused. They want to see gain. They want to see growth in a particular area. They want to see fulfillment in a particular area. They want to see direction, leadership, guidance, forward movement. You hear with builders words like create, build, explore, discover. And when we often think of builders, we think of self-starters, we think of new opportunities, and we tend to shy away from supporting these things because we think of secured, questionable about whether there is going to be continued success, et cetera, and so on. And so we are not as quick to support builders because we want to see evidence of success and possibility. But builders tell stories of strengths and how they're going to utilize those strengths to advance. They talk about aspirations. They talk about assets. They talk about impact. And they talk about worthiness. And the reason why we need to see both fixers and builders is there's a lot of opportunities when we think about fixers to maintain the status quo and reinforce what that status quo looks like. And for some situations where we see extreme trauma and tragedy, that's helpful because they're starting from less than zero. And we need to make sure that communities are supported and at least back to their orientation. But when we talk about really making power and wealth building advancements in communities, we need to see more support for builders. We need to make space for those who are willing to create, to explore, to expand. A long time ago, I went to a conference, a Grantmaker conference, and a poet was on stage and said that they were truly, truly grateful for all the grant makers who would come in their city. I won't name the city, I won't name the poet. We'll leave all of that off the table because it's apropos pretty much any city we go to. And they were like, you know, we are so excited to hear that you all are here and we appreciate all the money that's been funneled into our community and we can't wait to embrace it. And at the same time, I want to thank y'all in advance for being comfortable with us effing it up. And you could just hear the audible, I can't believe that he just said that. And he said, no, I'm serious. Because if we've never had it, we need to have the opportunity to dream. We need the opportunity to grow. We need the opportunity to fail and try again because we don't know what works, but we are for sure clear about what doesn't work. And so that is the different framing and mindset and orientation that we have to think about when we start talking about wealth building in communities, when we want to go beyond just reiterating and recreating the status quo, but building growth in communities of color. This is what it looks like. This is the mindset shift that we have to make. So I'm going to pause right there and I'm going to pass it to my dear friend, Tanisha Nash Laird. As I said, Tanisha is the CEO of Newark Symphony Hall. And when we talk about what does it look like to make change in a community, Tanisha is going to give you an actual example of the work that she's been doing. So Tanisha.
Thank you so much, Trella. I think you really lay the groundwork for what I'd like to talk about. What I'd like to do first is share my screen and share a profile that was done on Newark Symphony Hall right before the pandemic. We didn't know the pandemic was going to hit, but this was February Black History profile for CBS New York.
We're continuing our Black History Month series with a look at the Newark Symphony Hall. It was a venue that was open to African-American artists when segregation didn't allow many places for them to perform. But over the years, the city stopped investing in the institution. Now, all of that has begun to change.
A fixture on Broad Street.
That was like going to the Waldorf Astoria for us. I mean, they would go all out.
One step inside Newark Symphony Hall and its 95-year history begins to unfold.
I came to an OJ's concert here. I remember my mom coming to the Bell concert in 1975.
Built in 1925 by the Shriners for its Masonic rituals, Symphony Hall opened for public use after the Great Depression, but it wasn't until 1940, when Marian Anderson performed, that the doors opened to other African American artists, including the legendary Sarah Vaughan, who the concert hall is named after.
You had here on this very stage people like Isaac Hayes, like Nina Simone.
More than a music venue, Symphony Hall has always been a community gathering place. It was integral in the 1970 election of Kenneth Gibson, the first African-American mayor of a major northeastern city. But it wasn't immune to the unrest and the city's eventual decline years after the racially motivated uprising.
We were the home for the ballet and for the orchestra, and for the opera, and eventually all of them left. And at some point in the 80s, there was a decision to no longer invest in Symphony Hall and build a brand new facility here called NJPAC.
For so long, the iconic moments here happened in the past, but that all began to change within the last year.
I know it's a little rainy and cold outside, so we appreciate you guys being here.
In December, the lines were out the door as BET held a casting call at Symphony Hall's Black Box Theater for a new miniseries. Months earlier, the MTV Video Music Awards rented out the entire facility.
Missy Elliott, Normani, Bad Bunny, J Balvin, Wyclef, everybody rehearsed here. And then there also was a commercial shot here for the VMAs.
Tanisha Nash Laird has only been president and CEO since the fall of 2018. She's leading the revitalization efforts, which includes raising $40 million for a renovation.
Newark Symphony Hall is going to be a national model for what you can do to revitalize an institution, really, and make sure you do it so that everybody benefits.
Nash Laird is intent on making sure the diversity and African American culture that sustained the facility when everyone left is never lost. Even as the community in Newark continues to evolve, and she believes the greatest days are still ahead.
History Month series with a look at the Newark Symphony Hall.
Sorry about that. I was trying to stop it. And so that was the profile of us that was done again, February 2020. So first, I'm going to acknowledge that I believe that I'm a builder. However, I'm going to show some slides. I didn't show these at the conference in Chicago when it was in person, but Trella, in her infinite wisdom, really thought that we should have some slides in this format. And as I look at those slides, I realize there's a lot of fixer language in there, but I do believe there's also a lot of aspirational language. So I'm going to share my screen again. This time, I'm going to share the PowerPoint that I used to talk about our goals. Okay, so can you all see that? Okay, so Newark Symphony Hall, we call it the Gateway City's most historic cultural anchor, and I'm going to introduce you to this concept of symphony works. So here's that fixer language, right? Well, first, I think this is an asset. Newark, New Jersey is a predominantly people of color. As you'll see, we are predominantly Black and brown, 48% African American, 36% Latino, though of course that can be of any race, but we're predominantly people of color. Nearly 1 out of every 3 people in Newark live below the poverty line. And when you talk about children, more than half of the children in Newark live below the poverty line. So the question that I had as the new-ish at the time, president and CEO, was at almost 100 years old, how can the restoration of Newark Symphony Hall most benefit the residents of Newark, performing artists and the performing arts as a whole. Again, we opened in 1925. We were previously known as the Salam Temple and the Mosque Theater, and we were also the birthplace of New Jersey's first television station and studio. The television station ultimately became PBS, Channel 13 in New York. The UHF channel, Channel 47, eventually became Telemundo. So that building that you see there, and this is how we looked originally, was really the birthplace of a lot of culture. And as you also saw, the location of a lot of civic activity. But when I was appointed in November 2018, frankly, nobody thought anything could become of Newark Symphony Hall. And the only reason it hadn't been knocked down is because it's on the National Register of Historic Places. But we'll talk a little bit more. So the arts, I found this really interesting. Again, this study came out right at the top of the pandemic, top-ish. And by the way, that's Tito Puente, who performed. That was a television show that he would do, started in 1968. And this coming Friday, we have Tito Puente Jr. helping us kick off our Salsa Nights. But back to this study. This study was commissioned by the Knight Foundation, and it was undertaken by the Urban Institute. And the study was designed to find out what ties people to a community. And what they found was really interesting. People with access to arts and cultural activities are actually more attached to their communities, both in feeling and action. And those amenities actually matter more to people of color and to low-income people. But it's harder for those two populations to come by. And so the thought around revitalizing Symphony Hall is, how do we revitalize our institution for economic resiliency for the entire Lincoln Park neighborhood? And we had 3 goals. The first was is to align with the Newark Creates Cultural Plan. And then the second 2 are ours, really to create careers, not just jobs, right, through our work, and to grow locally owned businesses, and to use the renovation of Newark Symphony Hall and the neighborhood revitalization to help close the wealth gap. And so there's this concept of Symphony Works, which is innovation in culture and construction. Again, I love the great original posters, Dinah Washington. This process is highly inspired by history and the WPA from the New Deal. And so this is a local actor, director, producer. We had conversations with local artists, and Daryl had such a great quote. He said, "I imagine a city that supports, empowers, makes room, and provides resources for artists of all mediums to continue to cultivate the kind of cultural capital that great cities thrive on." And again, when our observation was that there really wasn't any institution that was centering the local folks. And that's where we come in. So this cultural transformation, it's about taking us from this white elephant to a polished gem. When I started at Symphony Hall, there was no sort of cultural programming calendar. We were essentially run like a community center, but like a community center without programming. You could sort of rent it for your baby showers. We had from baby showers to funerals, occasional weddings, but there really wasn't any sort of cultural programming. So the idea would be to center the creation of creative career opportunities for local residents, and then again, scanning across the country, centering the work of people of color from around the world, especially those that were in the forms of art that used to sort of dominate Symphony Hall in the early days, and that's opera, ballet, and orchestra, but differently. And so our Symphony Works includes film, TV, concert, careers training academy, and these are the career instruction tracks, production assistant training program, IATSE. We have a collective bargaining agreement with the professional union for light and sound, getting local people into that union, a concert careers pathway program, and a venue management program. I'm the sole Black woman running a performing arts center in the entire state of New Jersey. There is no other performing arts center that has a management staff that looks like ours. We are 100% people of color. We are Black, we are Latina, and we are Asian. And we essentially reflect what New Jersey looks like. New Jersey, by the end of this decade, is going to be predominantly what I call the global majority, people of color. And we are centering those folks and providing opportunities for people to create real careers in that track. Also, our renovation, it's a $50 million renovation. It's going to create 500 construction jobs and contracting opportunities for 50 small businesses. And again, very aspirational. We want 100% local participation, upskill local residents so that they can get those job opportunities, build capacity of local contractors, and again, spur neighborhood revitalization. This is the implementation. We created a Newark Symphony Hall 100th anniversary fund. And again, just a level set. When I started at Symphony Hall, I don't think we had $2,000 in the bank, right? And during the pandemic, we raised $7.5 million, right? And so these are the things that we need in order to really meet our vision. The other thing, this is all stuff that came during the pandemic, created a volunteer group of advisors to help us. All of these are folks that have a connection to the area. One thing that might jump out is that they are all African-American or African. They're the African immigrants. And what was interesting about this is we convened this group on the heels of it was either the chairman or CEO of Wells Fargo saying, folks that look like this don't exist, right? You know, it's very difficult for him, but we found these folks right in our community. And that's it. How do I stop? How do I stop? Oh, there it is. So, you know, Trella wanted me to talk about the things that we've been able to do. One of the other things was that there was an intentional disinvestment, as you heard in the segment. It's about 1986. In 1986, the Newark Symphony Hall, Inc. nonprofit was dissolved. A new one was created, primarily created from people in the community to manage Newark Symphony Hall. The reason for that, though, is that there was an intentional disinvestment to build a new venue called New Jersey Performing Arts Center. And from the initial ideation of the New Jersey Performing Arts Center to its implementation, NJPAC gets annual money in the state budget, not just for capital maintenance, but also for operations. So they get $2 million just for operations. We have not gotten and had not gotten anything in the budget probably for at least 2 decades. And each year that I was here, I was knocking on the door of the governor's office, knocking on the door of the legislature, and saying, you know, support us. During that time, I also was building a case, not only from a social justice standpoint, but an actual standpoint of all the stuff that you saw in terms of economics, and how NFF really assisted us and helped propel us, is that we were able to develop actual reports like the systems replacement plan. Systems replacement plan said that we would need to invest about $25 million over the next 20 years for all the building systems. You didn't get a sense of it in the segment, but we are 225,000 square feet. We have 3, yes, we go block deep, several stories high. We have a concert hall that was originally built with 3,500 seats. Our terrace ballroom, our legendary terrace ballroom, which everybody in every genre you could possibly think of performed that, has a capacity of 1,200. And our Black Box Theater, which again was the original location of Channel 13 and Channel 47, PBS Channel 13 in New York City, Channel 47, which became Telemundo, is a 250-seat black box. And that report that NFF helped us hire the consultants for us to develop found that we had $8 million in obsolete systems today, right? So to be able to say, this is what the result was of the intentional disinvestment of this building. So I'm going to pause because I'm sort of structuring this conversation a little differently, I think, than I did when we were in person. I'm going to pause and I'm going to ask Trella, to turn it back to you if there's some things that you want me to talk about.
Thank you so much. So what we were trying to accomplish with this particular conversation is to hear from the community. Here you have a community leader who has done the work. She's done her research. She understands her community. She is clearly defined where they can create jobs, create opportunities, create advancement in arts and culture to enhance the Newark community as a whole, and to build up the economy. And so it is clearly defined, but the question is, well, what role do we play in that? You know, do we have $1 million? How do we show up in that space? What does this mean as a grant maker if I can't invest in the capital campaign or be a direct advocate for the state of New Jersey to stop disinvesting in that community? What does this mean? And so I want to advance the conversation to really talk about how funders can show up in a different way. So the other thing that Travian shared with us is as the leader of BME Community, BME specifically and intentionally invested in builders, and they gave grants, and it was documented that in the cycle of their granting, the grantees within 5 years were able to secure 54 times the amount that was invested in them to get started. So this question about can startups work? Can people with building thoughts or creative thoughts really advance a system, a culture, or really change the community? The answer is definitively yes. They are investable. They are able to build strong returns on said investment. And Tanisha shared with you an example, and I do want you to share just a little bit more around the production assistant program and how it evolved, which started out as simply Newark needed money during the pandemic, and that's how it started. And then it was able to turn into a much larger project. So I'm gonna turn it one more time back to you, Tanisha, and then you can turn it back over to me.
Thank you, Trella. So you saw a little bit of this in the segment that, well, again, just to give you an understanding of the building and how the building was viewed as something that was not an asset, right? We have this huge building, but we have antiquated light and sound, but we have this huge building, right? And so what we realized was that there was an opportunity to rent our huge building to a different industry. Right? We were built for the concert industry, but it was actually television and film that really was interested in us. And we thought that what you saw about MTV was just sort of a lightning in a bottle. It turns out that during the pandemic, we got inquiries again. There is a television show called Wu-Tang: An American Saga. It's a drama based on the founding of Wu-Tang. They came and shot an episode. And then a television show came to us, and they wanted to just be there for the whole season. And we were able to secure a contract, a 7-figure contract for 12 weeks that was more than double our earned income prior to me coming there. And so as I was negotiating that contract, and I'm realizing that this would have been our 4th production that yes, I know, it's amazing, that we would have been working with. And again, you saw all of those things that I had in my presentation that were very aspirational. They also have a longer horizon, right? So getting people into IATSE through their apprentice training program, that's, half a year. Getting them through a theater training program, that's, a year. And then I said, well, what's the low-hanging fruit? Like, what's the point of entry in film and television? And that's production assistants. But a lot of times it's who you know to be able to get on a set, right? And so found a company that does production assistant training from California, called them up and said, hey, I want you to run this boot camp for us. And then we partnered with the Newark Alliance and said, we want to run this, but we want to run it for local residents that are ages 18 to 29, not necessarily college bound. And we also want to pay them as we're going through this training. And that's what we need you for. And the Newark Alliance came through and said yes, they're going to train them. And then we went back to America's Big Deal. That was the television show, America's Big Deal. It ran on USA Network, which is owned by NBC Universal. And we said, we're going to be training people as PAs right before you start. And we want you to hire the people from our PA training program. And Wu-Tang and American Saga just came back. They just, Mario Van Peebles was directing, who I love, was directing that episode. The RZA actually just came by last week as well. So we have probably 2 more episodes, but they've been hiring from our production assistant training program. And as that sort of, someone else I was speaking to couple of days ago was saying sort of that 360 thinking and looking at what is it that we have that we can leverage. They want something from us. They want the space. We want from them opportunities for the local residents. And it's just sort of breaking everything open. There has been a new major production facility that has been announced in Newark. It was announced during GEO in Chicago, and it is NJPAC, that other venue that I mentioned, and Lionsgate. And I wrote a long post on LinkedIn talking about congratulating them because it's a $125 million development. Lionsgate is going to be their anchor tenant. They're getting $20 million from the state to $20 million plus to do it. I talked about all the things that we've done and I congratulated them because I said, now you have an opportunity to do at scale what we've been doing at Symphony Hall. Why did I say that? Because when I watched that press conference, I was very disappointed at the things that were not said. That particular production talked about how they were going to be, the developer, they're going to be creating all these ancillary businesses to serve those new sound stages rather than create opportunities for local business owners. At our little salsa night on Friday, with more than 1,000 people have signed up to come to, and that Tito Puente Jr. is doing, we're offering our concession opportunities to Tejanos, which is a local Puerto Rican American, well, Puerto Rican is American, restaurant. And so everything that we're doing, we're looking at how can we leverage the little bit that we have to maximize and include the people rather than reinforce the systems, which oftentimes unintentionally are being done with these big projects. They're reinforcing their systems that took us to the place of inequity that we are today. So that's what Trella wants you to know about the PA training program. And the short version is, after 3 years of intense advocacy, last year we were returned to the state budget. I asked for $20 million because I said make up for lost time. Didn't get 20, but we got 5. And everybody said to go from 0 in the governor's proposal to 5 was amazing. The governor put out his proposal for this year. In terms of the institutions, Newark Symphony Hall has the largest proposed allocation in the budget for, I would describe, anchor arts institutions. And I think that is an amazing endorsement of the work that we've been doing over the past 3 years. And none of this would have happened if we did not have that early support that I mentioned and the data to show that we knew what we were talking about. So.
Thank you so much, Nisha. And this is an example of what building looks like, and super exciting to hear that there is some progress. But now I'm going to spend the last 15 or so minutes talking about how funders can show up to support work like this, not just in Newark, across the country, in different examples, to make sure that we can see ourselves in this work. And then we'll open the last 15 minutes up for questions if you guys have any questions. So feel free to put your questions in the chat in the meantime. So what can funders do? And now I'm gonna go back to those wonderful slides that we love so much. The number one thing that funders can do is to build partnerships. We are often thinking about the work as we will come up with the needs that need to be addressed, and then we will deploy in communities, and that'll solve the challenges that we face. But if we're talking about really building wealth in these communities, partnering with the community so that they can tell you what the need is a very different orientation and different approach. And we heard this so much at GEO, and I'm really grateful that GEO is continuing to tell that message. But it shifts the dynamic from outside folks who think that they know the community to inside folks who know the community and telling the work that needs to be done and building in that community. Continuing with grant making. And one of the things that Trabian shared is if you do 1 year grants, now do 3. If you do 3, do 5. If you do 5, do 7. If you do 7, don't stop. How about that? So just really reorienting how we think about grant making and investment, making it a long-term and continued effort in that community and not stopping based on the progress or immediate impact that we are able to identify with one program. Capital resourcing. This is something that we often forget because when we think of communities of color, we think that we can only give them grants because if we do any type of capital resourcing, they are not able to handle it. That is absolutely not true. There are tons of organizations led by and serving people of color who pay their bills. So we need to make sure that we are capital resourcing in those communities, but make sure that the capital is accessible, meaning not super high interest rates where we're expecting ridiculous returns on investment, and also that it is not it's not inaccessible based on the requirements necessary to access. So when we have processes that require you to have a CFO and you're a 2-person organization trying to make it happen, that's not exactly the best form of capital resourcing. And then continued funding, as I said before, and I highlight this one over and over and over again because I hear that poet's voice in my head. Give the community an opportunity to explore and create and fail in the process so that they can continue to grow and manifest and do things differently. So that's what funders can do. How do we do it? So what does that look like? We've talked about building initiatives, but having community-led design, actually starting, instead of starting with a list of grantees, starting with the community and hearing the community's voice on how to cultivate an initiative that supports that community. Engaging with multiple providers, partnering. We fantasize about this on the grant making side. I know I want to bring in 4 other grant makers with me to do this together so that we can have great impact. Here's an opportunity to support a whole community. Bring in those other providers and work together to support that community. Do not neglect capacity building. There is a continued need to provide resources and education, not because people don't have the skill set, but often because they haven't gotten exposure. So just making sure that when they elevate a question, that you have resources available to answer said question, and recognize that the questions, all organizations and all leaders don't have all the same questions. So being flexible in that orientation to provide capacity building as needed or in a function that allows multiple questions to be answered simultaneously. And then really giving increased considerations to continued resources. When I say resources, I'm not talking about just money. A lot of times grant makers have access to other grant makers and can make those introductions. And just calling your friend and saying something about an organization goes a lot further than any LOI or any other type of contact that that organization can make on its own. So that helps advance an organization's opportunity to really have impact by just using the resources that you have available to you that go beyond actual dollars. And then the one in purple that I never move away from, and I didn't even spell it out because everybody knows what it is, general operating support. Do not relegate funding to the initiative itself. Giving leaders the flexibility to use the funding in a way that is helpful to them based on their decision making, and truly investing in the organization itself, not the specific program that you want to see moved, can have a game-changing impact on how that organization is able to be effective. So if I'm managing as a leader in the course of a year, and I have a funder who says, I really believe in Tanisha's production assistant program, so I'm gonna give all my money to that production assistant program. And then another funder comes along and says, yeah, I really love the production assistant program, and I'm gonna give all my funding to the production assistant program. Tanisha does not get her development director funded and paid for, so she can't go get more money, right? So we are limiting and restricting her opportunities to be creative and investing in that community because she's only gotten one thing funded and everybody loves the one thing. So we really have to expand our thinking as funders on how we fund and opening it up to furthering opportunities for organizations. And last, I'm going to talk a little bit about initiative models, and this is some conversation that I think you guys can ask a lot of questions about. Here's some of the things that we've seen in different models. Making sure that the initiatives you engage in have multi-year timeframes. When we start talking about documenting impact, when we give an organization 1 year to produce, that seldom offers the impact that you want to seek. Not only that, they are adjusting, bending, and canoodling to try to make sure that they have the impact that you want to see in order to possibly secure funding in the future, instead of doing the work in a systematic and consistent way that actually builds progress. So multi-year initiatives are really, really helpful. Again, my favorite purple bubble is GOS, giving that general operating support. And in some of the initiatives we've seen, there are designated dollars and general operating support so that there is more flexibility in consideration. So maybe there's some designated dollars for specific purposes, but there's general operating support to make sure that the leader has the flexibility to really give focus on the impact that they're seeking and not worrying about, like I said, paying the development director, and gives them a little more flexibility. Capital investments, thinking about funding that goes beyond just grant making, but also thinking about 0 to 2% interest, low interest rate loans and other opportunities for organizations to consider. Capital campaign investments. A lot of the grant making that we do is very restricted on what we can fund. So giving more opportunities and flexibility on what we can fund. Technical assistance for needs identified. So often when we go in with technical assistance, we've predetermined what technical assistance is helpful. Having flexibility and pools of opportunity gives a lot more opportunities for various leaders to engage in a different way. You may have a rock star finance person who really, really sucks at grant writing. And they're missing out because they can't get additional funding because they can't write grants very well. So we really have to have flexibility in how we're thinking about technical assistance. Another purple button for me is peer engagement. Giving leaders opportunities and space. I'm gonna say this one more time. Giving leaders opportunity and space to engage with each other can be almost as valuable as dollars. They are working their tails off 24/7 to keep their organizations moving forward, and just giving them the space to hear and engage with someone else who's doing the same work, who has a different orientation and a different thought process, can have huge impact on them. So creating that space for them can be exceptionally helpful. Flexible reporting and engagement. Often we want what we want it how we want it when we want it where we want it, and we want you to use our templates, which means that we are responding 20 to 30 different ways in the course of a year to explain the exact same body of work. And that only creates more work that has nothing to do with the work that needs to be done. So really being flexible with reporting and how we're engaging with our grantees is super helpful. Direct contact phone calls. I went to a wonderful GEO presentation last week where they said that they required 4 questions for reporting and a verbal phone report. And I was like, what? That's amazing. So like thinking outside of the box of what it looks like to get the feedback that you're seeking and to really hear from the grantee, what is the need, what is the expectation, what is the orientation that they have to their work, where you're seeing advancement, where you're seeing struggles and challenges, and being flexible even with their ability to say to you, this part is not working. And it doesn't mean that the dollars are going to be snatched the next year is really, really important. And that's the last bullet, which is pivots are encouraged. Encouraging leaders to make changes in their own grant is absolutely beyond necessary. So if I write a grant proposal and I am restricted to what I thought about that grant 3 years ago when I wrote it, and we're 3 years in seeing something completely different, and the funder is not giving me the flexibility to think differently or to even share the pivot that was necessary to make the program successful, we're almost guaranteeing failure by the structure that we put in place. So really opening ourselves up to listening and allowing pivots and being supportive of those pivots are game changers for organizations. So most of this you've heard before, and hopefully you're like, oh, it's so good to hear it all in one particular presentation, along with hearing from an actual boots on the ground organization. So I just want to give pause here, and I would love to have any questions or thoughts or concerns that you'd like to share with us. Now, y'all not gonna make us the first session to end really early. So I know somebody got some questions somewhere.
Well, I have a question for the group. I'm going to turn it back on you. So we were really fortunate at Symphony Hall that when I, did that presentation that was very aspirational, Prudential, it actually wasn't Prudential per se. I'm going to give it the program officer, had a lot of courage and really went to bat for us, because a lot of people that I showed this to, I would say a lot of people thought it wasn't possible, right? Especially people who were in the city of Newark for a while. Well, what makes you think, you're going to make any difference, right? And by the way, was the sole difference, right? So everybody else that was at the organization, I wasn't one of those people that came in and got rid of everybody. The same people were the people who led us to this turnaround of success. But I guess I think, from my perspective, from what I understand about what you all do, it takes a lot of courage to speak up and say that you want to support something, especially that a lot of people would say is not impossible. So I guess it's not really a question. I was just going to say, have the courage to speak up in those situations, because if she hadn't, right, I don't think, and by the way, the amount of money that they supported us with initially was, I think, $75,000. And we've now raised total since I started $8.5 million. But they were 2 million of that 8.5. They came back and gave more money.
There's a question about if you wouldn't mind describing the process that led to receiving state funding.
Yeah, so I had, I guess, thank you, an advantage in that what I didn't mention, I don't know was mentioned, is that I was a city official for economic development once upon a time. So from 2005 to the end of 2006, I was Director of Economic Development and Acting Director of Housing Production for Trenton, New Jersey, which also happens to be the state capital. So I got to know a lot of the people in the state. Governor Corzine also appointed me to the as a public member to the Urban Enterprise Zone Authority. So I had an understanding of how to navigate, but that process was really, frankly, lobbying. It was first of all, pointing out the inequity, right? And pointing out that this has been a disinvestment, and say, hey, this is something that we need support for. And each time that I went, I was, it is a very complex scenario. I was told no. And each time I went back, I said, well, this is what we were able to accomplish without your support. Imagine if we had that support, right? What we could accomplish. And so I kept going back. And finally, frankly, I think it was during the pandemic, not frankly, it was during the pandemic that once again, the governor's proposal comes out and we weren't in it. And I was really disappointed. And I asked for and received a meeting with the governor's office. And they said, well, it's out of our hands now. It is with the legislature. So I was putting all of my attention with the legislature and going to them. It was very like going to foundations and funders, frankly. A lot of what Trella said about things that could be said to you were said directly to my face. What was said directly to my face by an assemblyman was, well, I think this other organization should take you over because they know how to raise money, right? And so I had to go, state legislator, thank you for saying that, because it allows me to share with you that we're about to get a $150,000 grant from the Mellon Foundation so that I can hire a director of development. And then next was said, well, I think that other organization should take you over because they know how to manage complicated projects like this. And I had to say, same state legislator, who I will say, because this is a fact, was an older white man. Thank you for saying that, because it allows me to share with you that I was the director of economic development for the city of Trenton, acting director of housing production, where I oversaw a few $100 million of activity. And actually, the senior vice president of real estate over at that organization that you want to take us over was at the New Jersey Economic Development Authority at the time, and we worked together. So he is my reference, if you will. So each time I had to thank him for saying that very insulting thing, but then also show my credentials. And it's frustrating because, people, I will just bluntly say, you see me as a Black woman, you see this rundown building, and there isn't a thought that, and you see our staff, there isn't a thought that there could be success. And so after we had this meeting, going back to the meetings with the governor's office, which the entire time they were steering me away from this idea that we would get into the budget. The next morning, I realized that they were talking about a number of programs as if I did not know what those programs were, tax credit programs. So I wrote a very long thank you email. And I said, thank you for meeting with me. As we said, it's been a couple of decades since Newark Symphony Hall has been in the state budget, and we believe that this is about equity. Every day, thousands of cars traverse the ramp onto Broad Street into Newark. They pass Newark Symphony Hall, which has been in continuous operation mostly since 1925. And unfortunately, it has the appearance of a very huge blighted building. And then there was questions about credentials, and I laid out all the things that I said. I also co-founded a venue in New York City that was funded through New Markets tax credits, and the leverage loan was done by Prudential, coincidentally, and it made the cover of the New York Times at the time. It was my late husband and I with some partners, and I linked to that. And I talked about my experience working in all the programs that I was questioned about, and talked about one of them was on the cover of the publication that's put out by the Regional Federal Reserve Bank, and I linked to that. And I talked about the new investment committee that we had convened, and talked about they come from Goldman Sachs and Facebook and Alliance Bernstein, and I linked to the article about that. And I said, expertise is not our issue, right? Equity in the state budget is our issue. And then I closed with, I'm a adjunct professor at Drexel University, and Bruce Katz, who's very well known in this space, is there. And he had asked me if I knew one of the people in the governor's office that I was addressing. And until that meeting, I did not. And I said, Bruce Cass asked me if I knew you, and I said I did not, but I now can tell him that I do know you. And I look forward to telling him that you have helped change the narrative of what it looks like to support a Black-led, Black and Brown serving institution in the largest city in New Jersey. And then we went to the legislature and got the legislature to put us a bill. But my goal with that email was, do not have the governor line item veto our bill. So.
Thank you so much for sharing. And what I am requesting, commending, and encouraging here is that Tanisha's story is not singular, that it becomes the norm, that she does not have to list the experienced people who support her and lead the charge in the work, because those people are in existence. They are here to do the work. There are fixers and builders that want to do the work, and we just need to figure out how to support them. I want to give one last encouraging note. Some of my colleagues have said, as program officers, if I say general operating support to my trustees, they run as though I set them on fire. And that is real talk. And this is the depth of conversation that we really need to be having. So don't call it general operating support, just say that you support operations. And that way they can give the same money and it just looks a little different. They feel a little more comfortable with it. So there are ways to get around it, and there are a lot of conversations that are being had about it. But we also know that in the midst of COVID, organizations pivoted and showed up in ways that we can't even begin to comprehend. NFF has completed its next State of the Sector survey, and there was an increase of almost 77% for needs that were addressed by organizations led by and serving people of color. So it's no excuse. It's no excuse for why these organizations are not being funded and not being given the opportunity to be responsive to their communities, because clearly they know how. They continue to do it. They survive whether they get the funding or not. And that's the thing that's so crazy, is they continue to survive. The question is, when do they get to thrive?
Thank you, Charla. I just want to say one more thing about that. Thank you for saying that. And I know we're running on time. So I recently had to go to the staff about that as well. We partnered with the other institution, NJPAC, on the other side of Broad Street on a concert, and it went well. It was Festival of Praise, but I saw how it really stretched us. And I went back to them and I said, we need to write down everything we actually need. And one of my I have staff members that have been there for decades. They said, oh, Tanisha, we've always been able to just make it happen. I said, we got to stop that. Right? I said, because we're exhausted. So we need to go ask for what we really need. I found out, again, this is a learning process for me. I found out that there, again, an institution during the pandemic went to the governor's office and said, we need $10 million for reopening, and didn't, choke or blink. And I'm sure once we get that number together, it's not going to be 10 million, but for the team, they said even asking for money, there was this idea that potentially we would be overreaching, right? And I said, no, we have to ask for what we actually need. And that's why I really also love another training. First of all, I loved everything about NFF. You're going to probably hear me, Charla says, don't talk about us. I said, I have to. Thank you. That training on full cost budgeting and like all of those things, those are really important things. So just know we still make it work, but we shouldn't be put in the position. Chela's predecessor actually interviewed me at the top of the pandemic. And I think I talked about, my mom and, figuring out how to make that soup, with chicken bones. And, that was 2 years ago. And I think I said what I really believed at that time, but I want the whole thing, right? I want the whole chicken, not just the bones. And so just know that we need that. We need that support, and trust us with that support.
And on that note, that's a closer. That's a great closer. Thank you all for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you, Trella and Tanisha, for sharing so much. Like, this session was so powerful.